What if I told you that in my family, turning 50 isn't a birthday? It's a death sentence? Not one person has ever made it past that age. Not my uncles, not my aunts, not my grandfather. They all went the same way. Healthy one night, gone by morning. And 2 weeks ago, my mother turned 49. The moment she blew out her candles. My grandmother Ruth stood up from the table without saying a word, walked to the hallway closet, and started pulling out blankets. By the next afternoon, Mom had been moved into what our family calls the quiet room, a converted bedroom on the top floor of Ruth's house where every dying relative had spent their final year. She needs rest now, Ruth told me, not even looking up from the row of framed photographs on the wall, a photograph for every person our family had lost. I'll take care of her. I always do. I grew up watching this happen. Every few years, another aunt or uncle would simply not wake up on the morning after their 50th birthday. There was always a goodbye letter waiting on the nightstand, written in their own hand during their final weeks. Everyone called it the family condition, some inherited flaw passed down through our blood, a switch that flipped at 50 and never failed. Except once. Why didn't it happen to you? I must have asked Ruth that question 100 times over the years. I honestly don't know, she'd say, and she always looked strangely bothered by it, like the question itself annoyed her. I braced myself for it. It just never came. Maybe I was left behind so somebody could sit with the rest of you at the end. She was 76, and as far as anyone knew, the only person in 4 generations to see 51. Growing up, I used to think that made her lucky. Blessed even. Like she'd been chosen to carry the rest of us through whatever this was. It never once crossed my mind to wonder if luck had nothing to do with it. This time it was my mother in that room, and this time I couldn't just accept it. When Ruth stepped out to make tea, Mom grabbed my wrist so tight it left a mark. "I'm not ready to go," she whispered. "I wanted to see you get married. I wanted grandchildren." "Maybe you'll be like Ruth," I told her. "Maybe you'll be the second one," she shook her head. "Nobody else made it, except your great-aunt Colleen." And look what happened to her. Colleen had lived to 51. For 2 days, everyone thought she'd broken whatever this was. Then her daughter died suddenly, and Colleen followed the day after. Ruth said the condition caught up with both of them, because Colleen had cheated it and thrown off some kind of balance. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I did what I probably should have done years earlier. I actually dug into our family tree instead of just accepting the story I'd been fed my whole life. I pulled up old census records, obituaries, anything with a date attached. And here's the thing. There were no 50-year-old deaths before Ruth's generation. Not one. Her own parents lived into their 70s, her grandparents into their 80s. The pattern started with exactly one person, Ruth's husband, who died on his 50th birthday, right after Ruth inherited everything he owned. Every death after that followed the same script, almost like a template someone kept reusing. "Mom, what actually happens in that room?" I asked her directly. "What does dying even look like?" "They just stop," she said. "They fall asleep and don't wake up. Ruth says it's peaceful. She's with every single one of them at the end. She says she's the only one strong enough to watch it." Late one night, I let myself into Ruth's study and went through the folder of goodbye letters she kept in a drawer. Different handwriting on every page, but the same strange thread running through all of them. Every letter mentioned feeling foggy and exhausted in the final weeks. Every letter thanked Ruth for her devotion. Digging through old paperwork, I found my mother's sister listed as having died at 50, except the certificate had no cause of death, no hospital, nothing but Ruth's signature as the witness. On a hunch, I searched online and found a woman with her exact name and age living 3 states away. I called the number. "Is this Aunt Diane?" A long pause. "Who wants to know?" "It's me." "Your niece." "Everyone thinks you're dead." "Good," she said flatly. "Let them keep thinking that. How did you survive?" "I left. The night before my birthday. I'd been sick for weeks before that. Dizzy, confused, exhausted all the time. The second I got out of that house, it stopped. Why didn't you warn anyone?" I tried with Colleen. Her daughter overheard me and started asking Ruth questions. A day later, that girl was dead. I learned to keep my mouth shut. I went to check on Mom that evening. She looked thinner than she had that morning, paler too, and Ruth had started her on a new herbal tonic for comfort. "I'm tired all the time now," Mom murmured. "Ruth says that's normal. The body knows when it's ready." While they were downstairs, I searched the quiet room and found a locked cabinet tucked in the closet. Inside, medical supplies, syringes, small vials, and a notebook logging dosages by name. The most recent entry belonged to my mother. Next to it, one line, "Increase gradually, build tolerance." I photographed everything and drove straight to the police station, hands still shaking on the wheel. The officer at the desk listened politely enough, but I could see him deciding I was just an overwrought relative dealing with grief in advance. He told me a death from decades ago, with no body and no forensic record, wasn't something they could reopen on a hunch. They'd look into it if I brought them something concrete. I left with a case number and nothing else. I begged Mom to leave with me. "What if it follows me instead?" she asked. What if it does to you what it did to Colleen's daughter? There is no curse, I said, my voice cracking on the last word. But I had no answer for why then. Everyone in this family kept dying on the exact same day, at the exact same age, in the exact same room. I paid out of pocket to have her tonic tested privately, but the lab needed weeks. In the meantime, Mom kept fading, more tired, more accepting, already starting to write her goodbye letter with Ruth sitting beside her, suggesting phrases. 2 weeks before her birthday, I broke into Ruth's bedroom while she was out and found decades of photographs. Every single person in their final portrait wearing the exact same glassy, drained expression. I found insurance paperwork naming Ruth as the sole beneficiary on every policy tied to every death, decades of payouts running into the millions. And tucked behind a shelf, a worn textbook on substances that mimic natural death. I heard the front door. I barely got everything back in place before Ruth was standing in the doorway watching me. "Curious little thing," she said, sliding a syringe out of her cardigan pocket. "Just like Colleen's girl." My legs wanted to bolt. "I forced them still," I told her, voice shaking but steady enough, that I'd been looking for extra blankets for Mom, that I must have gotten turned around upstairs. It was a weak lie, and I knew it, but I kept talking, kept my face soft and a little embarrassed. Ruth studied me for what felt like an hour. Eventually, the syringe disappeared back into her pocket, and she explained patiently, like I was a child, that the supplies were just standard hospice equipment. I apologized. I even used her own words back at her, something about just wanting to help Mom through her transition. She seemed to relax, satisfied I'd fallen back in line. My phone was recording the entire exchange from inside my jacket pocket. She walked me to check on Mom one last time before sending me home, staying close the whole way. Mom was in a deep, unmoving sleep, an empty glass on the nightstand, her face carrying that same hollow look from the photographs. I pretended to adjust her blanket and quietly snapped a few photos before Ruth walked me out. The second I got to my car, I called Diane and told her everything. The cabinet, the notebook, the insurance records, the textbook, the syringe. She wasn't surprised. She told me to get Mom out immediately. That fear was exactly the tool Ruth used to keep everyone in place. That night, sitting in an all-night diner parking lot at 3 a.m, I mapped the entire house from memory. Every entrance, every camera, the housekeeper's schedule, the one afternoon a week Ruth left for her book club. Small windows. That's all I had. I bought a hidden camera disguised as a phone charger the next morning and planted it in Mom's room. I emailed the police every photo I had along with a timeline. Their auto-reply promised a response in 5 to 7 business days. Mom didn't have 7 days. I found a private lab that ran rush toxicology and drained my credit card getting a sample of the tonic tested. I called Adult Protective Services and sat through an intake call where a kind but overworked woman promised a home visit, scheduled for the Tuesday after. Mom's birthday, I swapped Ruth's tonic bottle with a matching drugstore drink and smuggled the real sample to the lab. That afternoon, Mom was more herself than she'd been in weeks, alert, present, remembering things I'd told her minutes earlier. Ruth noticed immediately and casually mentioned needing to strengthen the dose, since Mom seemed to be building tolerance. She said it like she was adjusting a thermostat. That night, I reviewed the hidden camera footage and watched Ruth walk in at 11, syringe in hand, and inject something directly into Mom's IV line while she slept. I saved the footage in 3 places. I met with an elder law attorney who was honest about how slow guardianship cases move, and who sent me to the family's estate lawyer, a man named Preston Hale. Hale listened to my concerns with a face that went cold fast, assured me everything had been done properly, and all but told me to stop making trouble for a devoted grandmother. I left convinced Ruth had already gotten to him. The lab results came back. Sedatives at levels too low to kill outright, but more than enough to explain the fog and exhaustion. A full toxicology panel a few days later confirmed a slow, deliberate escalation, a dosing pattern built to look exactly like natural decline. I finally reached a detective, Marcus Kane, who took me seriously the moment I laid out the video, the insurance records, and the lab reports. He told me plainly, we needed footage of Ruth administering something and Mom's condition changing immediately after, with clean timestamps. I installed a second hidden camera, this one disguised as a clock, with a perfect view of the bed and the medication tray. A hospice nurse named Priya started coming around, hired by Ruth. She seemed genuinely uneasy about the paperwork. No real prescriptions, dosages that didn't match anything standard. I pulled her aside once and told her what I suspected. I watched her decide in real time whether to trust me. Ruth's lawyer sent a cease and desist letter accusing me of harassment. Kane said it actually helped our case, proof Ruth knew someone was closing in. Then came the email with a scanned DNR form, signature line ready, asking me to bring Mom down to sign it for her own peace of mind. I forwarded it to Kane immediately. He confirmed what I already feared: get that signed, and Mom's death becomes legally unquestionable. I arranged for an independent doctor to evaluate Mom's mental capacity. He was turned away at the gate, told there was a flu outbreak, no visitors allowed. Ruth had found out and shut it down before he ever got inside. The final toxicology report landed 2 days later. 6 weeks of steady sedative exposure, doses climbing on a clear schedule toward one conclusion. I bought a hidden GPS tracker and sewed it into Mom's robe, hating myself a little for tracking my own mother like she might disappear. But Ruth controlled every door in that house. And I needed to know where Mom was if things moved fast. Priya texted me at 10:15 the night before Mom's birthday. Ruth was preparing a final comfort dose. Attached was a photo, a syringe on a tray beside 3 vials, laid out like surgical instruments. Priya said she couldn't be part of it anymore. I called Kane. He told me to dial 911. The instant Ruth walked in with that siren, paramedics on scene would create an official medical record no one could argue with. Later, my cousin Diane flew in that same day. We built a plan over coffee 2 miles from the house. I'd stationed myself downstairs with the camera feed open on my phone, 911 ready to dial. Diane would wait near the back gate, key in hand from years ago, ready to help move Mom the second paramedics arrived. At 9 that night, the camera showed Ruth entering the room with the tray. I was already moving, dialing 911 as I took the stairs 2 at a time. I burst in just as Ruth reached for the IV line. She froze, then went cold and calm, insisting this was all a misunderstanding, that Mom had consented to comfort care. Diane appeared in the doorway seconds later. Priya came running up behind her and swept the vials off the tray, saying they needed to be preserved as evidence. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. Priya handed everything over and laid out the entire medication history in clear, professional detail. They loaded Mom onto a stretcher, confused but breathing, and I climbed into the ambulance beside her. Kane met us at the hospital and took custody of the vials on the spot. He wasn't ready to arrest Ruth yet. He wanted the toxicology and a proper warrant first, but he made it clear she wasn't going anywhere. The blood work came back within hours, multiple sedatives, at levels no legitimate treatment would ever call for. A judge granted an emergency protective order from Mom's hospital room the next morning, barring Ruth from coming anywhere near her. Not long after, Ruth's own lawyer withdrew from representing her and handed over decades of financial records without a fight, which gave Kane everything he needed to trace every insurance payout back to a single beneficiary, across every single death in our family's history. Adult Protective Services finally opened a formal investigation. Priya gave a full written statement. The search warrant hit the house days after Mom's birthday. Evidence boxes, the dosage notebook, the textbook, every goodbye letter Ruth had kept filed away like trophies. She was arrested in her own front hallway. She made bail within 2 days using estate money and hired a full defense team. Family split down the middle, half convinced I'd invented the whole thing to get at an inheritance, half admitting they'd always known something was wrong with how everyone died. Mom's mind cleared slowly as the drugs worked their way out of her system. A psychiatrist spent hours helping her understand just how deliberately she'd been manipulated, chemically and emotionally, into accepting her own death as fate. She cried the day it finally landed. Her own mother had been planning to kill her for money. We found a small rental house with real locks and no connection to Ruth or anyone in the family. I installed cameras on every entrance myself. Diane helped us move Mom's things in, and for the first weeks, Mom flinched at every sound and checked the doors before bed. Slowly, her hands stopped shaking over morning coffee. She started talking about her book club again, about maybe getting a dog. 2 months after the birthday that was supposed to kill her, we sat at our own kitchen table eating takeout, and Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm ready to actually live now," she said, and there was something steady in her voice I hadn't heard in years. I believed her, because I could finally see it in her face. Not fear, not fog, just her. The prosecutor still calls every few weeks with updates on the case, piecing together decades of deaths one insurance file at a time. It'll be a long road before anyone knows exactly how many people Ruth touched over the years, or whether the truth will ever fully catch up with what she did. But for the first time in my life, I stopped believing the word curse meant anything at all. It was never in our blood. It was just what greed looks like when nobody's willing to ask the obvious question, and I almost didn't ask it in time.